Hi, I'm Kim Setterlund. I'm the professor in the Social Work and Healthcare Settings course. And
Hi, Christina Bivona-Tellez. I'm the professor for the entry-level Master's Bioethics and Healthcare Policy course.
all right. Welcome, students from both courses. We're excited about what we have to offer for learning today, and we're excited about our Bioethics Committee, represented by various faculty as well as our community professional partners. So,
what we're going to do is open up with the first word of prayer after we introduce everyone. So I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves and what role they're playing. So first.
My name is Brent Wood, and today I'm playing the role of ethicist.
My name is Jeanette Martin, and I am playing the ICU intensive care doctor.
My name is Rayna Bowen, and I am playing the advanced practice RN.
My name is Jason Tavarez. I'm playing the risk manager legal side of things.
My name's Christine Chester. I'm playing the part of the social worker.
My name is Barbara Smith-Mustin, and I'm playing the chaplain.
And Barbara, would you open us up with prayer?
Yes. Father God, we thank you for this day and this opportunity that you have presented us with. And God, we pray that you are glorified even in this learning experience, that the students have good takeaways, and that we do all things according to your decent and in order provisions. And Father, we give you all the glory and honor for what we accomplish here today. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Amen. Well, we're going to give a little overview about what an interprofessional educational experience is about and why we're doing this. And we'll do a little orientation about how our day is going to be structured and where you'll be going and coming back to. So, Kim, I'll let you begin.
all right. So interprofessional education is when we bring together two or more disciplines for shared learning on shared patient care situations, and ultimately the learning is about improving patient care outcomes. So Dr. Tellez and I decided that we want to bring nursing and social work together on a very unique and needed topic, which is bioethics and patient care.
And so one of the things that is so key is for us to help you build your resilience. It's like your shield that you go out or shock absorber. And so bioethics prepares you to understand your values, what is important, your preconceived ways in which you, or filters that you look at situations with, and help you be aware. But more importantly, then an ethical framework so that you can use that to evaluate these moral dilemmas that you will face and probably are facing as you go out into the healthcare delivery world. So we want you to be prepared and resilient, so to speak. So may your resilience be a good shock absorber for you as you go out in your practice.
So in preparation for the learning activity today, each one of you looked at the 4-box bioethical tool. As part of preparing for today, we will have a copy for each of your groups to refer to, and we do want you to apply that decision-making process. Additionally, you each researched a discipline which you will be joining in the discussion group.
So each of the disciplines will be broken up into and go to different groups. So we'll be here for a presentation by the Mock Bioethics Committee, and then we will dismiss that group, and then you will go by discipline to the different rooms. After 30 minutes, you'll come back, and then we'll have the opportunity to ask questions, because I'm sure there'll be concerns that you have as you have met with your group to ask other members of the committee. And then we'll try to come to a consensus. Okay?
All right, let's get started.
So I've had the pleasure of teaching some of you, and we're grateful for your attendance here today. We're going to do our best to function in a way that a bioethics committee would at a medical center. I am functioning today as the ethicist and just really sort of the moderator. This panel is made up of a number of faculty and professionals from the community, and then some of them have designated roles, but we've also asked that they speak from their professional roles besides the ones that they're designated for our learning purposes. So if you have questions, please jot them down, keep track of them. We'll be able to consider them in the breakout sessions. I think you have the schedule. We'll be a little fluid on the 3 to 3:30 committee meeting. Somewhere about 3:30 or so, we'll break up into our groups, and we'll reconvene here from 4 to 4:25 for further discussion on the case. And then as close to 4:25 to 4:30, what we will come up with is a recommendation, right? Because you understand that ethics committees or bioethics committees at hospitals don't make the final decisions. They make recommendations. And so understandably, there's quite a diverse group of people that typically are involved in a bioethics committee at a medical center. And so I'm going to ask Christine Chester, who is in fact a social worker at a medical center, if she could just give us a brief overview of the case, which I trust that because you're such diligent students, you have already read carefully. But if Christine could sort of give a summary of the case, and then I think she and Pastor Mustin Smith will give us their, will get us started today.
So Brent, as the
Talk in your mic.
yeah, so Brent, as the chair, how would you open us up as the formal chair of the ethics committee? Because we'll be in role now as we do this, as opposed to it being a student experience.
Well, in my experience, it's quite often a social worker, someone who has had interaction with the family. And so at this time, I'm going to ask our social worker, Christine, if you would give us a summary of the case and what we're dealing with and considering today, and also talk about your interaction with the family.
Great. So just pretend my SpectraLink is ringing the whole time, and then it's real. So our patient today that we're discussing has been admitted to the intensive care unit now for 4 weeks. He's a 25-year-old male. During that time, we've had the opportunity, both the chaplain and I, to meet with various support persons who have come to visit, including his parents, as well as friends, and in particular, a former girlfriend that is caring and still was in friendship and communication with our patient. There seems to be, I'll let Chaplain talk a little bit more about what the family have expressed. The friends have expressed, in particular, his former girlfriend, that they actually took a class together. They took a bio class together and went to renew their licenses together. They're expiring at around the same time. And they both had discussed together that they would like to be organ donors, and so both knowingly had signed up for that. And she said they weren't aware, and she wasn't aware that there's a second step to that process where to specify, your wishes of organ donation, you're supposed to go online and, finalize that. Of course, the patient doesn't have an advanced healthcare directive, which we've also heard from the family and friends. But as far as statements the patient has made to friends, they felt that that would have been in line with his statements about it. That he'd actually had a couple of conversations, specifically with the former girlfriend about organ donation, and that he felt it was a positive act that a person could take, and that's why they both did so. At this point, we've had meetings with the family. The friends were not present at that time. The family, there's a bit of a divide. The family are very religious, and the friends are not, and so they're not a natural support to each other. So typically, they visit separately. But the family the friends were aware of the plan of compassionate extubation, and the family were also aware of that plan, of course, and signed the consent, I believe. But then once they came to the hospital, they had a different timeline in mind, which I understand is why the physician requested the committee to convene today. So I don't know if you want to speak to more about what the family had expressed.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to meet with the family a lot in the evenings. And the family, in particular the parents, are expressly against any organ donation at all. And in speaking with them for the times that I've met with them, I kind of find that their reasoning is both theological as well as based in a long-held family tradition that has to do with the idea of one being buried whole and complete because when their bodies are resurrected, they believe that it should be that way. And so this is the root of their strong opposition. They have met with their religious leader as well, but I don't think at this point they've gone into detail to understand that there might be some misunderstanding in their theologically held beliefs. And so my concern for them right now is to have them or help them, if possible, to understand the theological ramifications of organ donation and maybe allay some of their fears.
Okay, thank you for that. That's helpful background as we meet today and try to come to a consensus as a committee. We also have with us today an advanced practice nurse and a representative from nursing administration and also the hospital risk management. So in whatever order, and as well as our physician, in whatever order, I just ask you to speak from your knowledge and your perspective on this case at this time. Maybe we could start with Rayna.
Okay. Well, I've had the pleasure of taking care of the parent's son for a couple of shifts now, and it's very difficult. It makes our job difficult in trying to care for a patient and then also deal with the families. Getting to know just through the visits with friends and family, getting to know different perspectives, and how each person knew the patient that we're taking care of. I also have to speak to the family as well, and knowing that it's just very hard for them to see their son in this condition. So I think we should also take into consideration the parents and their wishes as well.
Thank you. Chris?
Representing nursing administration, I have certainly legal counsel and myself with risk management have discussed this case really at length. And our concern here is the family is adamant that this not happen, the organ donation. And if it does, they are willing to sue. We've had an excellent reputation in this community as a caring medical center, that we have gone over and above to be family-centered, looking at the interest of our community, and we have strong relationship with all the different other faith-based communities. And there's some real concern that if we honor what the Organ Procurement Donor Act has, that we will cause a significant rift with us and the community and our public image, which I have to say is something that we have to weigh. At the same time, as I'm meeting with Rayna and other nursing staff members, we understand that we want justice to happen. We would love for this family to come to a place where they would be willing to donate JD's organs in all the ways it could be, because how many more people, even in our hospital right now, we've got several people on the organ donation waiting list that could benefit from this. But at the same time, I'm very concerned about us, the risk exposure that this case represents. So maybe, Jason, you can say more.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's really important to acknowledge how difficult this has to be for a ton of different stakeholders. The three most important stakeholders that we really have to consider, we have to consider the patient, first and foremost. I think that's really, really of paramount importance. We have to consider the parents because of their relationship to the patient and also their relationship with the hospital, both positive and potentially adverse. And then the other most important one is probably the hospital. We have to weigh the legal ramifications of moving forward with potentially, for lack of a better term, pulling the plug, because I'm not a doctor or anything like that. I don't want to try and get into any of the medical terms. With the idea that we have to honor the patient's wishes and look at the totality of the circumstances. In this particular case, we know that that JD had the heart on his license, so we know that at some point he was actively consenting. As many of you are aware, we have the two ideas of consent, right, when it comes to organ donation. We have presumed consent, which is very common in Western Europe and South America, places like that. We also have it, and we also have express consent. Presumed consent is, the presumption is that you are going to donate your organs unless explicitly told that you don't want to, right? Express consent is, I have to expressly opt into the organ donation program. In America, we have the express consent model. We have evidence of that express consent on JD's license. And while he did not fulfill the last part of the process, which is actually identifying what are you comfortable with actually getting rid of, or donating, I should say, pardon me, you do have to be really aware that we want to keep everything in line with what the patient at the end of the day wants. Additionally, we also have the age of consent. Typically that's 18, right? That's what we think of as the age of consent in the United States. In California, for medical procedures, as many of you are aware, it's 12. And seeing as this patient is 25, the idea of whether or not that person could consent to something like this, we can take that off the table. There was no indication that there was any kind of issue that would have, slowed down or potentially retarded his developmental age. So we can assume, for purposes of this exercise, that 25 is 25 and that he was able to actually consent. We also have the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act, which states that unless there is express evidence to the contrary, we're going to go with what the donor or the patient wants. In this case, it seems like all signs seem to point at least to that license and the organ donation heart. But you had mentioned, Pastor Mustin, that you had talked to the parents. They had talked a little bit about him going to church and his religious background. So when were some of those conversations taking place, as far as maybe coming back to the faith or following in his parents' faith journey?
Well, what I learned from the parents, and we know Jason had been away and basically out of contact with them for quite a while. But in the last year or so, he had come back home, come back around, and in fact returned to the family church. And so there was no indication or reason for them to suspect that he had deviated from the long-held family tradition of burying whole and complete. And so this is where their disdain lies with the idea of organ donation. There was nothing. He came back, he resumed all of their religious practices as he had before, and there was no indication that anything had changed. So that's kind of what we're up against with the family and why their objection is so strong at this point.
We should say, too, that he renewed his license 2 years ago. So that was during a period that he wasn't in consistent contact with his family, but he was in good relationship with his community. But I think therein lies a little there's some differences. His wishes, there's a discrepancy there in between.
Maybe I can weigh in for a moment. Thank you. So I've been taking care of JD for a month now that he's been here in the ICU, working closely with a neurologist that's been following him. And the reason that we are even approaching this decision is because he has less than 1% chance of ever waking up again. He's completely obtunded. The family has accepted the fact that he will never be the same person that he was before. This makes it a lot more difficult than, let's say, if he was actually brain dead, because he is not brain dead. So there is a decision to be made. If he was brain dead, there would be no decision. So I wish that we would have known that he was an organ donor prior to this, because unfortunately I think this has set the family up for a confusing time because they thought he was going to be terminally extubated an hour ago, which is why we find ourselves in this emergency meeting right now. From my point of view, I really just need to know which way to go. I'm prepared to offer him comfort care at this point. However, if we're going to go to the point of organ donation, then that's going to be a totally different process with him needing to be worked up for it by the OPO, with him needing to go to the OR and have his organs harvested while he's still alive. So the parents will not be able to be there when he is terminally extubated, which might be a concern of theirs. It's a much different death than it will be at the bedside. And if I can play devil's advocate for a moment, I know that we're worried about being sued. I'm worried about being sued, believe me. But we can also be sued for not honoring JD's wishes. If he is indeed a registered organ donor and we do not honor his wishes, we can be sued for that. So I'm just throwing that into the discussion because I'm really leaning on our legal experts to let us know which direction we need to head in.
Can I ask a clarifying question to the physician? Just so that as a panel, we have a clear understanding of what JD will experience so the parents, I think, had signed a DNR already, and then as we were returning the belongings at their request, that's when one of the nursing staff saw his license, saw the heart, and so at that point, the DNR is not in effect, I think, at this point until the committee makes the recommendation and comes back, is my understanding. But if hypothetically organ donation was going to occur, what would he experience? Would the parents have any chance then of experiencing the natural passing with him? Could he survive the, basically after he goes to the OR, is it a given that then he wouldn't return to the ICU post-op, or what, what's the alternative for them?
If he's a DNR, it would be like any other patient that's a DNR, and they may or may not be an organ donor. So if he is to go into cardiac arrest now, before we've decided this, then we are not going to resuscitate him.
Right.
Insofar as if then he goes to the OR, then he will not be a DNR. He'll be full code at that point. So that we would try to revive his body in order to keep him alive long enough to harvest his organs. And then, I'm sorry, did you have another?
More I'm sort of thinking through when we're talking to the family, either way, how to prepare them, because it is, I think, what they have a high value on, not including the religious beliefs about being buried whole, but they really want to be present for his passing, for his last moments. So I think if there was a chance, and I know there's never a guarantee, but if there's a chance that he could survive the organ donation experience and then have a palliative, then be made DNR comfort care, but I don't know what that looks like on the flip side.
I've had families ask that before, and when the patient goes to the OR, there are representatives that are there from the organ donation company, but they also have to have a hospital representative there as well. In a 25-year-old male like this, they're going to want to harvest all of his viable organs, which will mean his heart, which will mean everything. And so there would not be a way to keep him alive on the ventilator during that procedure.
So goodbye would be
So they would
before
need to
the
say goodbye
OR.
before.
With a pulse. In their view, he's still here, and they don't. Yeah, okay, that helps us clarify really what the family are looking at.
Which is a different experience from.
Comfort care measures and okay.
Correct.
That's helpful.
Okay, we are fortunate to have at our committee meeting this morning students from Azusa Pacific University. We're glad that you could be here for this serious case. I do some teaching at your university, and we've had an orientation within our own committee here to talk about some of the guiding principles that we need to consider when making our recommendation. And you are familiar with them: autonomy, justice, non-maleficence, and beneficence. So these are the kinds of things you will want to consider and you've heard some of that terminology or related terminology in our discussion. Obviously, there's a great opportunity for beneficence and following what appears to be the wishes of the patient in donating organs and other parts of his body. So if he's a relatively healthy 25-year-old, an awful lot of people could benefit from that. But we also have to balance that with the potential for a non-maleficence and pain and suffering for the family, who have a very different picture of what needs to happen for their son at this point in his life. So we are going to take a break at this time, and you have chosen various people to meet with, and we're going to meet and take the next 20 minutes or so together, and to meet in our groups and discuss this case, and then we'll come back into this room. Let's try to be here no later than 4 o'clock.
So, let's announce where we're going to be, the students.
Let's come back to order here. What we want to do is give all of you opportunities at this point to share any questions that you had in your groups. And once we've had a chance for the panel to hear and respond to those questions and for there to be some dialogue, then we'll reconvene our groups, and if you didn't already, or even if you did, see if the way what your decision was in your group still holds. So you with me? What questions do we have? Just speak right up. Oh.
So if one of your groups, you want to ask a clarifying question to one of us on the Bioethics Committee, this is your opportunity to do so.
My group had good questions.
So we have a...
I wish I did.
He's agreed to...
Eric, do you want to ask your question?
Really quickly, has anyone tried to negotiate with the family to find a compromise as to what organs they're willing to donate or anything like that?
That is an excellent question, which I will defer to our social worker and chaplain.
So the quick answer would be that discussion would be held with the OPO, the Organ Procurement Organization. The hospital and the hospital staff and caregivers, well, I guess staff, is not going to be positional per se. So if it's a discussion like that, it would be with usually all of this doesn't involve the hospital. Usually it's just with the OPO. So because we're not necessarily going to know, maybe they've assessed the patient for certain things, so we may not know what the patient is a candidate for. So they'd be the ones that would, certainly we'd be available to debrief it.
You did that well.
Can I interject something real quick too? The ultimate question for us as an ethics committee is really whether to move with pulling the plug now or waiting a little bit. And we're not really going all the way into the organ donation, even though that's kind of intrinsically linked to what we're talking about. It has to be a completely separate process. So the OPO is really and I know it's kind of confusing, right? It's a little confusing, but the OPO is the ultimate one that's saying, okay, please donate your organs, and we're just trying to help facilitate the delay in this case of actually pulling the plug. So.
Which he means compassionate
Yes.
extubation.
Yeah.
I didn't want to butcher that. So.
I have a question for the chaplain. You mentioned earlier in your conversations with the family that there were some theological misbeliefs. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I don't want to say they were misbeliefs. I said that there were some theological concerns that might be unfounded doctrinally. The family believes that when a person dies, a Christian dies, that they will be resurrected from the dead at some point, and that they should be resurrected intact. So it's a belief that the family has held for a long time. My concern is whether it is valid theologically or not. And if there's a way, along maybe with their religious leader, to get some clarity to them, if that might help them further along.
Other questions?
My group wondered about the research grant money. Do you want to, Eric, you want to? Remember the CNO popped in and said, oh, by the way.
Yeah, so the CNO popped in and said, by the way, that there was, the family was major funding a new research building
Yes.
within the hospital.
Yes.
And I was just wondering that wouldn't that be an ethical concern, and would that be something that we would need to escalate to authorities or powers to be that that should be something evaluated?
Well, certainly with administration, they're worried about continuing operations. And that when anonymous donors decide to become non-anonymous and announce themselves, which this family did because they felt so strongly about their wishes being honored and feared that they wouldn't, they got the big guns out, which is their donation that they have made for this research wing. And as an institution, we're very concerned because we actually have quite a few of our excellent medical staff and clinical staff who are active researchers, that this would jeopardize some of the research studies that we had planned and really puts us in a precarious situation with the ongoing training and mission that we have for education for our university-based hospital center. So it's ethically, yes, it's a concern that this would be brought up and maybe a conflict of interest. Yet at the same time, we're trying to balance the mission and ongoing work of this teaching hospital with the support of excellent researchers who are, nationally and internationally renowned, with the honoring the organ donor procurement plan. And that's the challenge of leadership and administration. You have all these different forces that you have to balance as you come to a decision. And so the CEO talked to me and requested that I share that they had made this request and share it with the committee.
Can I interject something?
Yes.
So I think the operative word there is words are conflict of interest. And so what you would do as a committee is you would look at and see who would be directly maybe working with that research wing or potentially directly affected by the research wing, and if there was any kind of intimation or anything that would connect that person to maybe being unable to be impartial, then you would ask them to recuse themselves, or hopefully they would recuse themselves. And so that's how we would. So it's a great question. Conflicts of interest are really, really important, but that's how it would normally be handled.
Any more questions? Way back there.
If the bioethics committee had to reconvene because they couldn't reach a decision, would it be the same panel, or would it be a different panel of, new physicians, new nurse administrators, like someone else different on hand that would come together to discuss the same overview of the patient's case?
I can. Generally, the bioethics committee itself has two immovable persons, the chair and the vice chair, and one has to be present. And then the other roles are roles, not persons. So it says chaplain, social worker, risk manager. It doesn't say the name, but, right? Generally, it's.
Every hospital has a different.
Right, it can be a little
They
different.
run it, for instance,
Jeanette,
ours. Oh, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
Forgot. That was really loud. Anyway, we have the head is a physician, so we generally try to have him. If not, we have an alternate physician that will sit in. We also have, we are a religious institution, so we have a mission leader.
Right.
And either she and or our ethicist will sit in. If they can't be there, they conference in on the phone,
Right.
one of them. In general, we would try to keep the same people together. These are the people that are invested already in a case. We know the case. But sometimes everybody's schedules just don't mix. So maybe instead of the intensivist, the attending would sit in, or the palliative care doctor,
Right.
or another social worker, or somebody like that. But we would try to keep the same people together for ease and continuity.
Which is a good point, because specialists are invited, the physician will request them in, so they may be pertinent at different points. So yeah, it could be a little different.
Other questions? Maybe as a committee, any last parting comments that we feel like we want to make from our positions?
I think we talked a little bit in our group about, how do people come into a decision? Are there times when people don't come into a decision? Things like that. And I just kind of spoke a little bit to the idea that as the bioethics committee, you are not really there to provide the recommendation, but to support recommendations and to open the dialogue. Sometimes it's almost like a mediation. I hear what you are saying, I hear what you are saying, where can we meet with this? In a case like this, we might want to ask risk management for some more legal clarity, to reach out to our hospital legal team about what does it really mean with the pink dot? And so what if they haven't gone and done part 2? And is that just I am choosing the particular organs that I want to be donated? And if you don't do part 2, are we then just assuming you are donating everything? So that is a question that I think is still a viable question. I would love to know the answer to that, actually. So we had talked about that in our discussion team as well. But I think in this kind of case, we would then give our risk manager some work to go back and speak with legal, and then probably have to reconvene again.
I think too, the takeaway that unless you're in the higher paid positions, like our director of nursing and our ethicists, that you just to stand firm in your own clinical practice. Each of us in our different disciplines has our own ethical code that regardless of where we practice, that we adhere to. And so there may be things like a research building or whatever, but at the end of the day, if we are caring for that patient, just to stay centered in what we understand to be our own practice and caring for our patient as best we can. That's why they get paid the big bucks, so they can have more stress. So.
And I would say, just to kind of piggyback on that comment, the scope with which you're operating, is really important, and who you're, I can't think of a better word than allegiance is to. In this case, like the legal side of things, it's your allegiance is to the hospital, sometimes against your own moral or ethical better judgment, and I've seen that play out in other situations that are not necessarily as heavy or as weighty as life or death like this. But that can really test you a lot of times. But really understanding your role and what your role is relative to everybody else's is really, really important.
So as a CNO, I'm conflicted because my heart is with the nursing staff and the other clinical staff who also would be reporting to me most of the time, and understanding their code of ethics and how they need to practice to be have fidelity with that professional code of ethics. At the same time, I put my administrator hat on and realize the risk that's at place here for the future educational teaching mission of our institution, the risk of splintering this key donor and this influential family and other research that is in the offing. So it's very, very conflictual of how do you really weigh both pieces. And it's not a clear black or white. And you have to weigh all those different pieces.
Well, and then it becomes a justice issue. With this money, we could help how many other patients, and what does that look like? And so there's a lot of different pieces that come in.
I heard the ethicist is good friends with the parents, by the way, so I don't know if anyone's.
Perhaps he should recuse himself.
Yeah, I heard he has a big office in this new building.
Yeah.
I was telling Christina, though, the other day, what I love about this setting is that there's nurses and social workers together, and our code of ethics are very similar, and a lot of it comes together, and we work so closely together with the chaplains, with all of us, just trying to do the right thing, and sometimes it's so hard to figure out what that is. And I was sharing our conversation earlier about the heart. So does that mean they're registered, or does it not, in part 1 and part 2, and how we were able to have a discussion about it. But what I love is even if you don't agree with someone or you don't know certain pieces, this setting makes it able for everyone to be collegial and everyone to say, you know what, you might be right, I might be, I don't know, let's find out.
So I'm wondering what should we just take a vote right now to say by hands, how many people would say donate the organs? Raise your hand. How many people would say do not donate the organs for risk of allegiance and teaching mission and everything else? So if that was the case, we would be donating the organs. And yes, ma'am.
Would the physician be making that call to have the organs donated against the parents' wishes, or?
Great question.
A good question. So Jeanette, what?
That's a really good question. Normally, when the OPO takes over, it would be out of then the hospital's hand. We would just hand it over, right? And then everyone signs off, and then they have to actually pay for the rest of the hospital stay. The physician is likely not going to take somebody off life support like that and offer compassionate extubation if he thinks that there is some legal drawback to that. So he would probably have to work really closely with the administration to say, you know, am I okay then to do compassionate extubation and not go the route of donating the organs? I think that unfortunately, in this day and age, this is a very litigious society, and I've seen physicians make decisions that I haven't really agreed with because they're afraid of being sued, and that's just the truth. I've seen physicians go against the recommendations of the ethics committee because they didn't want to be sued.
And I think the reality about suing is if I'm in a group practice, these are my other people I'm in a practice partnership with, if I'm sued successfully, the cost for their malpractice insurance is also raised. So it's like we're in the boat together, and we sink or swim in terms of our malpractice coverage together. And so you feel like then you're not only jeopardizing your own malpractice cost and coverage and ongoing, it's also your people that you're in practice with.
And it's not even really about being sued successfully or not. If you're sued, period, that your company is having to pay out legal costs, they're having to pay out costs in court, and it adds up like crazy. So I've seen doctors that have won their lawsuits, and their rates are jacked, sky high.
So let me just interject here. I think the structure of the day indicates that we as a ethics committee for this hospital will try to have some sort of consensus in our recommendation. And the issue that's presented by this case with all of these considerations comes down to is our recommendation, do we interpret, do we decide that from the evidence that we have and the information that we've processed, that we honor what appears to be the wishes of the patient and recommend you know, that the process that's involved to make that happen? Or do we go with the wishes of the parents where there is this compassionate extubation and they get to be present with their son while his, when he's removed and his heart stops beating.
Can I offer, there's actually a third scenario that would be present that we haven't addressed, which is that this is based upon the parents as the surrogate decision maker signing consent for a DNR and opting for compassionate care, palliative care. If they did not, then the patient, who I'm assuming already has a trach and peg, would then go to an LTAC or a subacute and would no longer be a candidate for organ donation at that point. They would then go to a long-term care location, and this is just another gray option, but then the physician, then everyone else, we no longer have there's no longer a mechanism for the specific decision, and they could just say, if they were savvy to the system, they would say, never mind, make him full code, send him to a subacute or an LTAC, and then a week later they could say, okay, now we want palliative care, and an LTAC is different than an acute care hospital. I don't think they automatically notify an OPO, and so they would in that setting not be offered organ donation in the same way, because hospitals automatically notify an organ donation organization just based on clinical criteria, and I don't think it's the same, especially for a subacute. I think it's just for acute care hospitals. So anyway, that, in theory, from a case management perspective, that would have also been on the table. Just to make it even.
If the parents were
if they wanted to
of
go,
that
right.
and wanted to change their mind and entirely go another route, they
So,
could do
so
that.
for the sake of instruction and our discussion today, it's important that issue is raised. But let's. My recommendation is that basically in our group, either the decision was to make the recommendation for the donation or not to.
Right.
And I think that's what it comes down to. So maybe we could start with our chaplain and we'll each indicate what our vote is on that. Somebody keep score here.
Well, in my group, their decision was not to make the recommendation for organ donation. And I am at that point as well.
I think our group thought more like we wanted to honor the wishes of the patient and carry those out as best we could. In real time, I think my recommendation would be to put the recommendation on hold for 2 hours or 6 hours until our risk management department came back with clarity about our legal mandate, because I think we were tasked with a question without complete information.
Our legal group actually came to the conclusion that we would advocate for, I want to say it right, compassionate extubation, mainly because there was pretty clear and convincing evidence that that JD wanted to be an organ donor, and there was a lot of confusion from outside sources, really the parents, but there was nothing in writing. There was no explicit instruction that said I revoke that idea. And then the California law, right? The Uniform Donor Act. And so we relied on those things. Yes?
So not compassionate
extubation.
We went organ donation. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, the legal group
That's
is
why I don't
advocating
try and
for.
do the medical stuff. Yes, we wanted to do the organ donation, so we were going to delay that. Sorry.
Got it.
I'm sorry.
So the legal group was actually, even with all the financial and liability considerations, advocating for moving ahead with what they perceive to be the patient's rights here.
Yes.
Okay.
So-
Chris, CNO?
Yeah, CNO has to recuse herself because of all the other implications that go on. And I would not speak for our nursing advanced practice role, so I'll let Rayna do that.
Okay, cool. So our group decided to go with the harvesting of the organs. We talked about different things such as the respect for autonomy and what the patient had wanted when he was capable of making those decisions. We did also talk about how the organs could help several other patients that we may have been caring for at that time. And then we also talked about a variety of different things as far as like the quality of life for that patient, and just because we're extubating doesn't mean he's pain-free or anything like that, comfort care. So we talked about various scenarios, but what we came up with is that we would honor the patient's wishes and go for the organ donation.
And that was, okay, got it. I think I have this right then. Okay. Doc?
So we didn't actually take a poll in our group, but we did talk about waiting and getting more information and coming back because it felt unclear, especially we talked a lot about the organ donation laws. And that would be my personal preference if I was sitting on the committee. We talked a lot about maleficence, not harming the patient, how a doctor can't be forced to do something against his will. Patient autonomy, just really wanting to respect what JD's wishes were as well.
Okay, our results then are based on the 7 participants that we have here.
What about the ethicist group?
Yeah.
I'm coming to that.
Okay.
So, and our ethicist group, we had 6 members, 4 were in favor of donation, and 2 in that group were in favor of not donating. So ultimately, the decision was in favor of donation. But we also acknowledged, while we could make a case based on, ethical analysis, however we arrived at that decision, we're very concerned about the compassion and concern for the parents, and that was going to be the challenge. But we are trusting in the abilities of our social worker and chaplain to help smooth the way. So here's the final decision as it turns out from our recommendation as an ethics committee. We had 1 recuse. We had 2 vote hold making a decision pending further information or research. We had 3 in favor of donating and 1 explicitly not donating. So that's so that would be what we would be presenting, for consideration by the hospital and by the physicians that are involved in the case. So, final comments or questions, and I know that you have a questionnaire or a debriefing document to fill out, but before you move to that, and we want to make sure we collect those, right? Thoughts or questions or responses now at this point? I'll bring the mic if you have another response or question. You're hungry and you want to go home for dinner. That's it? Okay. Any last comments from the panel, from our ethics committee?
Just in favor of what we think we should do, if we take more time for legal information to procure some clarity, it also in real life, we would then return to the family and take advantage of any psychoeducation, addressing spiritual distress. Probably you would consult with their priests and just to see what peace and what clarity could be offered regardless of the outcome.
Exactly. In fact, those were things that we discussed in our group about meeting with their religious leaders as well. The prevailing thought, I think, in our group, they kind of role-played out, taking into account not just the card and the heart that was on the card, but they also took into account that this young man had left home, possibly, just to do things on his own, and they took into account the girlfriend, but was an ex-girlfriend, and he might have made a rash decision. And they judged that because he did not take the second step. And when he came back home, had he been really into the first part of the decision, perhaps it would have been something he would have shared with his parents. And so those were things that they considered and which moved them away from organ donation.
Yeah, I want to second that. We talked about that in our group as well, is maybe it's an education piece for the parents. And our goal is not to create or foster a relationship with the family that's going to be contentious in any way. We don't want to be at odds with them. We want to bring them in with us and have them help us come to the right decision together. So it could be an education piece by saying, this is the law, we're so sorry.
Right.
Please give us your money for the wing. Or whatever. But, you know, this is really the law.
Aligning ourselves with them.
Right.
Yeah.
We wish we could do this differently with you, but we are in this position alongside of you. Perhaps they need to be kindly educated as to the friends saying, no, we really did have conversations with him. This is what he wanted.
Right.
And in our group, I said, you know, how many of our parents don't know if we have a heart on our driver's license? I said, my mom doesn't know what mine says. You know, I think that's an important conversation to have with your family. But I think there's a lot of family that would be surprised by our individual choices. But really, I think education and just really coming at it with kindness and compassion, oftentimes at the end, that smooths the way and provides a bridge for us all to be on the same side together and not be sued at the same time.
Yeah, and in healthcare, there's such a temptation, just depending on the personalities, but there's a temptation to think that everything is urgent. And like in my experience, having been a committee member, some of the most important pieces have been that we took our own liberty to say, no, we're not gonna, because it wasn't an emergent decision. It was a quality decision, you know, a quality of life decision. And so I was very grateful that there is an option to always say, and just when you work with physicians, especially if you tell them, hey, I think we have incomplete information, that triggers for them. That triggers for the whole team because we're operating on a set of information. And unless we know it's complete, then all of us are going to say, okay, well, I'm willing to step back and put my opinion on pause. So just in your own practices, when you're the bedside nurse or social worker, you know, that care, it really just comes back to that integrity of practice and compassion. And that's that makes all the difference.
Okay.
All right, we want to make sure you have filled out your paperwork. And Kim?
I'll go ahead and distribute the paperwork in a minute, but I just wanted to kind of close if there aren't any other questions, but just kind of just what a rich discussion this was, but I can't help but to just kind of acknowledge that I'm left with kind of an unsettled feeling with the decision of the Bioethics Committee, and I'm wondering where you're at with that. And I know that you have a reflection or process paper to write following this bioethics meeting. So I want to encourage you just to kind of, whether it's put some of that in writing now or just kind of collect your thoughts, because inevitably with bioethics situations, we don't come out of the meeting feeling like we have a victory, feeling like we all made this collective decision, right? As you could see, 3 were for organ procurement. 2 needed more information, and one adamantly said no organ procurement. And we're dealing with life here, and we're dealing with family members, right? So inevitably, as healthcare providers, we are left with being human, right? And as social workers and nurses, I want you all to consider, how are you going to address these affective and emotional responses, right? One of the things, there are several implications, right, to take this with you, right? Dr. Tellez and I talked about the risk of moral injury and talk about the risk of burnout and the risk of vicarious trauma. So as you are continuing to go through the programs that you're in, I want you to continue to think about, what is going to help you to prepare for professional practice, and then also what I always call help you kind of thicken your own professional skin as you prepare for practice out in the field. Right. All right. Okay, so.
Okay. So then what's left? Complete their pre and post impressions, and somebody going to collect that?
Yes, we'd like you to do that. Yeah, we would like you to do that. But also, if you want to talk about what this experience has been like for you, and that would be really helpful. So we could go around and people can share what this experience has been like for you. Did you?
Well, while you're doing that, we're just going to distribute this pre and post test because we're interested in hearing kind of how you perceive your level of knowledge of just 4 questions. Okay, so, but we don't want to take away from the debriefing.
All right, great. Let's go ahead and get any sort of responses.
Would you recommend this being done next, in future semesters with the school social work?
Yes, I think that's a resounding yes.
From a social work perspective, this was really helpful, and as a macro social worker, to be able to see the direct patient, like making sure that his wishes are honored, but also understanding that the hospital has these legal allegations that could come against them, and honoring the community too. And so it is an interesting balance, and I don't think there is an easy answer. So it was good for me to try to sit in that and kind of decide what ethical decision I would come to, but not easy.
Yeah, I kind of, can you hear me? All right. I'm also a macro social work student, and I found it very interesting because I think one of you made the comment about staying more or less in your lane, like sticking with your ethics and what your field values, and that's very helpful because I think I came into this definitely thinking, well, you got to think about this, and you got to think about that, and what about this, but all of those things are not the social work practice and the social work ethics. So I think whoever made that comment, that was helpful to channel where you'd be coming from.
Who else had a comment? Up right behind you.
For me, it was challenging because I chose the attorney role. And so from my perspective of a social worker, I knew what my decision would be, but coming from an attorney and from what I've researched, I was like, okay, my client is the hospital versus my client is the patient. And so it was so different for me to navigate that. It was a great experience though.
I think it gives you an appreciation for the challenge that attorneys face too, because it's not like it's not like they're relativists in their own worldview and ethics.
Right. Yeah, good point. We've got someone over here.
As a nursing student, I thought it was a really good experience to see all of the different roles together, because in our class we talk a lot about it from the nursing perspective and sometimes from the hospital perspective, but we don't get to hear as much about social work's input or the chaplain or even the physicians or risk management. So I just think it was very eye-opening, and for me helped me realize that obviously you're not an island in a hospital setting. Like you are a part of a larger team, and sometimes there are competing opinions on that team. So I thought it was really valuable.
Hi, I just wanted to say that being able to see this truly reinforces my belief in a holistic approach and having everyone work together, and always knowing that if, let's say, usually if it's a physician or a nurse that is just stressed out with whatever it is they're going through their day, and they're not being as, let's say, compassionate as we would want them to be in such a serious situation, is being able for me as a social worker to say, you know what, there's so many other things going on, and that they're going to give the best answer that they can, and if they can't, that they'll put a hold and say, I need more information. So that really reinforced it for me. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Well, thank you guys. I mean, well, I should say something. Well, just to experience the mic, I've been holding it for a while. Anyway, well, to try it out. Anyway, that was a good experience for all of us. as Rachel said, I pointed out, we talk a lot about the nursing perspective. I mean, so we got to see the perspective from, different fields, in the healthcare setting. So that was really good. In terms of the ethics committee, like to believe in the real sense, we get more information, right? Yeah, especially the doctors, I would think they talk about the criteria and stuff like that, that, helps us make decisions, because sometimes if you don't have that decision, we really don't know what to, how to go about it. But as you pointed out, Dr. Wood, that sometimes, in most cases, we do this with lack of information, So, well, that is something to think about, that sometimes we have to make decisions with little information that we have. And, yeah, that's about it.
So I just want to say, on the teaching side of this, I know that you would really rather have had like a PowerPoint. Wasn't this collaboration wonderful? If we come in, if it's an informed discussion, an informed collaboration, because we've done our homework, done our reading and prepared, I think this is the richest kind of learning. And I love the cohort model for learning and the diversity within that cohort. And now to bring two disciplines together, it's just so complementary. So I want to thank Kim and Christine and whoever was involved in pioneering this, and ask them to have the last word here for setting this up, because it helps us recognize the importance of collaboration, the value of each of the different disciplines represented, and the battle that we have to make ethical decisions in a real-world context. And then when all of a sudden we found out the parents were these formerly anonymous donors, how did that impact our decision? So a lot of variables going on here. And so Chris, Kim, what's the final word here?
I just want to say I'm thrilled the students are flexible and want to be trailblazers with us for this interprofessional educational experience. And our hope and prayer is that we prepare you well, and that you also get really excited to learn and expose yourself in ways that can at times feel very raw. And I hope this was a safe experience for you to explore your own feelings and thoughts, your values and concerns, so that you can come away stronger and better prepared as you very shortly go out and have to assume some very important roles professionally, dealing with life and death issues with families and with your peers. It's not simple, but and I do want to thank our amazing panel who they donated their time to be here, research with us, and it's just a real honor and privilege to be part of all this. So thank you very much.
And I echo that. I appreciated the feedback and comments just right now, and I'm glad that you found this valuable. And I think that we want, as educators, we want to expose you to as much learning in your pre-professional practice as possible. Because when I went to school to be a social worker, I did not have the benefit of learning in a safe environment such as this one. I attended a bioethics committee and didn't know what was going on. So, I think we really want to be able to expose you to more of the real life situations while we're in the classroom setting. And so I hope that there are some meaningful takeaways for you as you go back to your classes, as well as going into your practicum internships as well. And I also want to echo thanks to our committee members. They're not just actors, they really are who they say they are. We are just so privileged to have just a strong network of professional practitioners who could really speak into a difficult case. So thank you, and thank everybody.
Thank you.